What's happening, everybody? Welcome back to the studio. I hope you're all doing fantastic. Recently, I've had a few questions about my reamping setup here at the studio. Not just how it's set up, but also why have I been using so much reamping in my workflow. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to go through that workflow, the whole setup, as well as give you a few scenarios on why I've been using it and how it's actually benefited those sessions. First, I want to start by doing a little walkthrough of the amp setup I have out in the live room right now, because it is a fairly common setup that I use. So I want to show you that, and then we'll come back in here and I'll show you how I have everything set up in Logic, how it gets out to the amps and back in, including a little trick I use to make sure everything lines up. I do have a patch bay. It's right there underneath the camera that you can't see. So I am sending out through a patch bay and tie lines in the walls, but it's really no different if you're at home with the simple interface going directly to the amp. So we'll go through that whole thing in a second. But first, let's take a look at the setup I have out in the live room right now. This is a pretty common setup for me to kind of have permanently out and mic'd up, especially the bass rig. You know, because this is my main Ampeg rig and my absolute favorite little Polytone Mini Brute down there. And that actually has been there for, oh man, probably a couple months at this point, hasn't moved. And I can just kind of switch between the two amps. I have a radial ReAmp box on the top. To split, I use the headlight, and then I can run whatever pedals I want to run into this. This Ampeg Scrambler, as I like to call it, the Skip Scrambler, is a pretty cool pedal. And then the guitar rig over here has another radial ReAmp box on the top right there, and this was just from the last session. Also a fairly typical mic setup for me. The Roswell Pro Audio Mini K47 and the Mojave Audio MAD. Their dynamic mic, pretty cool. And one reason I like this area, besides the fact that all the pedals are here and it's easy to get to, it's also right next to the panel in the wall. So those bottom two right there, those are going to the patch bay in the control room. So that's what I'm actually sending the signal through the walls. They come out there. Then one is coming up here to this radial ReAmp box, and the other one is going over to this radial ReAmp box right there. And sometimes I'll just take this guitar amp and just shove it back against the wall, and it'll just stay there. And then whatever, if I want to change something out, if I want to grab the Marshall, it is a total wreck in here, or the Framus or something, Black Star, I can just go grab that and bring it over here. But even if I have drum sessions going, the fact that everything kind of stays over here, I can leave that set up and get to it real easily, so I can continue working around even large sessions, which is kind of nice. And I have a video coming out soon that's going to feature this actual bass setup, a combination. I got a tune with a pretty cool sound that I just want to show you. So anyway, that is the setup out here in the live room, and that's the wall panel where the signal is coming through. Now let's go back in the control room and check things out. Now let's take a look at the process from the beginning. I lay all my sessions out when I'm reamping exactly the same. Here I have 6 different tracks. My DI tracks are these dark green ones, and the lighter green tracks are my mic channels. I do this exactly the same way. It makes it easy for me to see things in the session and know exactly what they are. I also like to lay out anything that's left, center, and right all together. So in this case, I have my left DI and my left mic channels, my right DI and my right mic channels. If I had guitar overdubs, you know, solos, fills, anything like that, it would be a similar order. DI, mic channels, DI, mic channels. Dark greens, light greens, dark greens, light greens. Super easy to see. Now that we're organized, let's go through the signal flow out to the amp and back. So I take my DI track and I select the output that I want to use. In this case, this session I had used channel 32. This will be different for everybody and completely will depend on your setup. I'm using channel 32. That comes out of the Motus in the patch bay. Then I patch into the tie line in the wall, goes to the wall panel in the live room, then to the ReAmp box, then to the amp. Getting back in, kind of obvious, starts with microphones that you have on the amp. That comes into whatever mic pre's you have or choose. In this case, I've chosen, I have 25 and 26, so I'm on this part of the console. And then I'm monitoring everything out the stereo. So the flow is output of the DAW. For me, comes out of the patch bay, into my tie lines, through the wall, out of the wall panel to the ReAmp box, to the amp, microphones, back to the mic pre's, into Logic. And that's it. Now you're going to have some inherent latency whenever you're doing any reamping. And that's going to largely depend on what your buffer settings are. I'm running 64 right now. I'll go 32 sometimes depending on how large the session is. But there's always going to be a little bit because you're coming out of a computer, going through a whole signal chain, and then going back into the computer through the I/O. So here's the little trick that I do to make it really, really easy to line things back up. You can see I have this clave track. And I have this at the beginning. I actually drop it on top of my DI tracks. That way when I hit record, it actually sends this clave out through the amp. So I'll pull this back. You can see it there. So I've recorded the clave now through the amp. And then what I'll do is I'm going to zoom way in on this clave track right here. Way in. All right. Oh, there, I'm basically at the beginning right there. And then I'm going to scroll down here and you can see I've already lined up these guitars. So all I do is once all my reamping is done, I just select those tracks. I take my playhead and put it right at the beginning of that clave file and I just drag everything back. Done. I don't have to worry about guessing. Sometimes it's easy to see. Sometimes with a lot of distortion or fuzzy tones, it's really difficult to see. I find that the clave makes it super easy to know exactly where everything lines up at. And then occasionally you forget to turn it off and you're in the middle of a mix and all of a sudden there's these claves everywhere, especially if you're doing guitar solos. Makes everybody laugh. So it's like an icebreaker, comedic relief during the mixing process as well. But that's how I line things up. Next thing I want to talk about real quick is volume. Most of the time I don't have an issue with any of the DIs I've been sent, especially if it's Ernesto who's sending them to me. And that's the case on this session. You can see I have pulled the fader down on both of these to get the volume going to the amp where we wanted it while we were doing the reamps on this. But I never adjust based on what I see unless I get a DI that looks like just a giant sausage and I know something's wrong. Usually I'll send out to the amp first, I'll listen for what it sounds like, and then I'll make adjustments according to what I hear. Because I have done it just off site and looking at the waveform and I've been completely wrong. So I will always start by listening first, and then I'll adjust with either the fader in Logic, or if maybe the volumes are off a little bit over throughout the song, I might go and say, just take a chunk and go, okay, this part of it's just a little bit too loud. I'm going to cut that. I'm going to go up here, and I'll maybe, bring that down to the necessary level. But usually a fader move is enough, and that's it. But that's how I handle any volume discrepancies. Okay, let's say you don't have a patch bay to deal with, you're not running through the wall, you don't have an amp in another room, or you do have it in another room, but you're not going through a wall or have a patch bay. The process is essentially the same. You're going to start with the output of your DAW. Send that to whatever output is available. So you're going to need to make sure you have more than two. So if you're working with two outputs, this is going to be hard because you would have to do this without monitoring. And I'd be willing to guess that most of you have at least 4 outputs or more nowadays, but just make sure you have more than 2. So send it out the output. Your line out is going to the ReAmp box to amp, microphone, and back into your interface or via your, favorite mic pre, whatever you have. It's that simple. I/O, line out to the ReAmp box, into the amp, microphone, back to your I/O or via your favorite mic pre. And that's it. It's pretty much the same setup I have here, and it should work great for you. Now that we've gone through all the tech side of things, here's 3 ways that I use this ReAmp system all the time. Number 1 is remote collaborations, where maybe I'm writing stuff here and I'm sending to a bass player or a guitar player, obviously not here, could be somewhere else in LA, or it could be anywhere else in the world really. And I want to be able to still get the tones that I want. Sometimes I'll tell them to get whatever sounds they usually get, but just send me a clean DI as well in case I would like to reamp through my setup. So that's one way. Two, and this is a big one, writing sessions, where we may be writing, we may have like 2 or 3 days of sessions back to back, but the goal is to write as many songs in that period as possible. So we might not be focusing on getting all the songs completely done in that time span. We have a drum sound up. We want to get the arrangements right. We want to get good drum takes, and then we can build everything else on top of that. And then when this is the case with this tune, the session we were just looking at there, where we would work on things separately. So maybe we get all the drums done, then Ernesto would take all the guitars home, and over the next week or so, work on that stuff on his time at his studio while I continue working on other things, and then we come back together to do the reamping. And that allows us just to constantly keep moving forward, especially when everybody's schedules get busy. That's about the only way to really make a lot of progress in a short amount of time without having to all be in the same room every single time. There's also the case where I may do some writing here and come up with a bunch of stuff, and then I'll send it to Ernesto and say, hey, I've got these ideas, can you put some guitars down? And he'll go through all of that, and then once he gets something he's happy with, he brings it over and we reamp, where it would not be possible if we had to always wait, or it'd be harder if we always had to wait to be in the same room. So that's the second way, the writing sessions. And the third way, and this one's starting to become a bit more common now, I have a handful of bands that I'm working with start to finish, where the budgets are tight, so we are trying to figure out the best ways to maximize sessions when we're in the studio. So we may book 2 or 3 days back to back, record as many songs as we can. A lot of the times it's EPs, or maybe it's, long EPs, 7 songs or something like that. But the goal is to get the bass and the drums as tight and good as possible. So we might take a little extra time on the setup, getting the drum sounds and the bass sounds. We'll still set up guitar rigs, and we'll have everyone play together so we get that energy and that vibe. But our goal is drums and bass. This is how I've been working with Mortalis a lot lately, and it's worked out quite well because we get great rhythm section takes. I bounce stems at the end of those sessions, bass and a drum stem. I send that with them, then Serge and Austin go and record all the guitar parts. They get to go through everything, make sure they were happy with solos, rhythm parts. Once they have everything in order, we then book another day in the studio and we reamp everything we possibly can, and then we go do vocals. So we really maximize the time when they are here in the studio. And I do that with a few other artists as well, and it works really, really well. That's 3 ways that I use this whole reamp setup in my daily workflow. But I'm curious, how are you using reamping in your workflow, or are you even using reamping? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all for joining me on this video. I hope you're all doing fantastic. Get out there and make some music, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.